Isabelle, I'm in Paris, of course. And you?
I'm in New York. By the way, did you see the email from Sotheby's? They would like us to help with their important design sales in Paris and New York.
Oh, let's make this global a world of design in 2 cities.
Who should we include?
We need to include American designer
Isamu Noguchi,
Henri Bertoya,
Louis Comfort Tiffany.
George Nakashima.
What about the UK? Ireland?
My muse, Riley Gray.
We need French designers. François-Xavier Lalanne. Claude Lalanne!
Jean Royer.
Charlotte Perriand.
What do you think for Germany?
INGO MAURER.
And then Swiss artist, Diego Giacometti, of course. Alberto Giacometti, the king. And Italian artist, Joe Ponti, Sarfati.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good. Let's get to work then.
See you at Sotheby's. I love you.
I love you too.
Hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Adamson. I'm a curator and writer based in New York City, working on topics of craft, design, and contemporary art. And it is my pleasure to welcome you today to a wonderful conversation that we're going to be having about design through the 20th century from Isamu Noguchi to Les Lalanne, François-Xavier and Claude Lalanne. Sotheby's latest important design sales in New York and Paris feature works by Noguchi and Les Lalanne, as well as pieces from GIACOMETTI, Jean-Michel Franck, Tiffany Studios, and other influential 20th century designers. So I'm delighted to welcome you to this special event, which is part of the Sotheby's Inspirational Living series, organized in partnership with Intelligence Squared. We're going to be talking during the course of the next hour about the impact of designers, as well as thinking about the role design objects play in our lives, how they present an opportunity to live amongst art, combining beauty and function. I'm thrilled to have with me 4 brilliant guests to discuss this topic. First and foremost, joining us from New York as well is Julianne Moore, Academy and Emmy Award-winning actor and collector, the first woman in America to be awarded top acting prizes at the Cannes, Berlin, and Venice film festivals. Hello, Julianne. An honor to have you with us today.
Hi, it's so nice to be here today.
Really looking forward to talking to you about design. We also have from New York, Dakin Hart, good friend of mine, dear colleague, senior curator at the Isamu Noguchi Foundation and Garden Museum, where he oversees the museum's exhibitions, collections, catalog raisonné, archives, and public programming. Hello, Dakin.
Hi, it's nice to be with you.
Great to see you, as always. Now, over in Paris, we also have 2 guests joining us. First, Jean-Gabriel Mitterrand, art dealer with decades of experience and founder of Gallery Mitterrand, which is dedicated to showcasing contemporary sculpture and historically significant artists who started their career from the 1960s onward. Jean-Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, great to be with you.
And last but certainly not least, Florent Jeanniard, head of 20th century design at Sotheby's Europe, a former private dealer based in Paris. Florent is an expert in the work of a number of notable artists and designers from the 1970s, including, of course, Noguchi and Les Lalanne. Hello, nice to have you with us.
Hello, Glenn. Hello, everybody.
Okay, just to give you a little sense of what's ahead, the event, as I said, will run for about an hour. Towards the end, we will be taking your questions, which you can start submitting now. Underneath the video screen, you will see a web form where you can enter your name and your question. To submit the question, just enter your details in the box and click submit. Super easy. And now we are going to turn to our topic, which of course is an interesting and perhaps unexpected one, thinking about Noguchi, a Japanese-American artist, architect, and designer whose sculptural work blends the modern with the ancient, the East with the West, maybe a slightly unpredictable combination with Les Lalanne, a French husband and wife duo who created surrealist sculpture heavily inspired by their natural surroundings, especially animal forms. What they both have in common, I think, is a commitment certainly to challenging the boundaries between art and design in the 20th century, so the distinction between aesthetic and purely functional form, but also a kind of extraordinary animation and in-depth exploration of materiality. So Dakin, if we could, let's go ahead and begin with Noguchi, which means beginning with you. So could you introduce us briefly to Noguchi as a cross-disciplinary thinker? I'm curious if design is even a word that you like to use around Noguchi. Is it a word he used, and is it a word that you think is appropriate to his practice?
It is a word that he used simply because he didn't have a choice. The main thing for Noguchi was he just wasn't interested at all in the categories or the labels, the words. He was interested in the work. He was interested in what could actually be done, and was willing to have other people label it after the fact. He didn't like it, but he was willing to have that happen. He knew that it would happen. I think we have a very good image of what Noguchi considered to be functional design. A piece that he designed very early. This is called Play Mountain. The proposal, simple proposal, was to build a man-made mountain in the middle of Manhattan. This is Noguchi's idea of a functional object. You can call it what you want, but from his point of view, what he was trying to do was to shape social experience and shape our consciousness. And if you want to call that design, great. If you want to call that sculpture, great. Noguchi wasn't an either-or person, he was an and person. So I would say that he would say it has elements of both. And he's almost always synthesizing rather than trying to balkanize and categorize.
Great. Julianne, I guess you don't get to live on Play Mountain, but you do get to live with quite a few Noguchis. And have a particular interest in his lamps. Can you say a little bit about what drew you to him and why you admire him so?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important to say about him is to talk about what an easy entry point there is to his work. You know, as a person in their early 20s who was trying to learn about design, I would go to little design stores and museums, and that's where you would find an Akari lamp. You'd find a little Akari lamp that you could afford. So there I was, kind of, interested in these objects, and I found this beautiful, light, textured sculptural piece that I could afford to put in my living room, right? So that led me to kind of learning more about him, learning more about his life and his sculptures and his contribution to art and design. I was absolutely fascinated. And I don't think that can be underestimated. What is the barrier to design? And a lot of the people that I think we're talking about today are people who are interested in reaching everybody and who had a theory that the design was to make your life better, to make everyone's life better. And I think that there's no better example of that than Noguchi.
Yes, absolutely intrinsic to his conception of design. And it strikes me that when you encountered that lamp as a young person thinking about design for the first time, you were doing exactly what he was hoping people would do in response to his work.
Wait a second, something's going on with my sound. Okay, let's try these.
Always a technical mishap. It wouldn't be an online event without a technical mishap. Let me just ask you, if I can, Dakin, about the question of Noguchi in space. So Julianne just said rightly that he was very interested in accessibility, and one of the ways that he did that was, as you pointed out, through playground design, for example, to try to open up space for people. And I suppose he also thought about space in a rather cosmic sense as being intrinsically related to time. So very philosophical person, as well as a great maker of physical objects and spaces. Can you say a little bit about his relationship to that whole palette of ideas?
Absolutely, and just to emphasize what Julianne said, Noguchi's point was that sculpture, he said, could be a vital force in our everyday lives if pushed into communal usefulness. And that's really an excellent description, I think, of what he had in mind. I think we've got an image that kind of covers the full range of the way that Noguchi thought about space. So space is everything from outer space. On the left is an image he made. This is actually a portrait of his lover, Ruth Page, the dancer and choreographer Ruth Page, as like a nebula. She's an amorphous blob of ectoplasm or matter in space. At the center is a piece called Mitosis, which is Noguchi's sort of abstraction of cell division. So Noguchi is interested in everything at the scale of the universe, but he's also interested in the scale of reality and nature at the level of the cellular structure. And then on the right is a wonderful thing. Noguchi is kneeling on a piece called Another Land, which is now at the center of the Noguchi Museum, where I am in New York City. What I love about this image so much is you see he hasn't done anything about the dandelion weed that's growing up between two of the stones. This is meant to be a sort of landscape, imaginary landscape or a space of the mind. It's like a section of lunar landscape. So you're supposed to imagine it, or you can, on a very vast scale. But as soon as he kneels on it, it turns into a seat or a sort of a human-scaled landscape. And in fact, there's another wonderful image in our archive of Noguchi sitting on this with a group of friends, and one of his friends has placed her camera on the corner of the piece, and it suddenly shrinks it down to, again, the size of, it could be a divan, it could be a floor pillow. It becomes a piece of design. What Noguchi loved was the kind of resonance between those two states, the constant going back and forth between the micro and the macro. And that's, so in talking about space, he didn't think about it in the kind of vague mid-century way that so much sculpture is discussed. He thought about it in a sort of a cosmic way, as you said, a way that just, Noguchi always had a way of thinking around whatever the cliche is. And again, that comes from his sort of general resistance to labeling and categorization.
One of the categories that was foisted upon him in a way was that he was this man caught between East and West. And I wonder, Dakin, if you would comment a little bit about his identity as a global practitioner, somebody who was cosmopolitan and thinking about multiple artistic traditions.
Yeah, I think it's maybe now the most important thing about him is that he is among the first artists and designers that we know of who had a truly global consciousness. He was Buckminster Fuller's friend starting in the 20s. Bucky Fuller coined the great term spaceship Earth. Pretty much Noguchi's entire career was dedicated to trying to make spaceship Earth a better sculpture. And by making us love it and feel more connected to it, he really was ecologically minded in that way. But I think as a global practitioner, again, he was always synthesizing. Bucky wrote a profile of him in 1960 in which he said he thought that Noguchi, or believed that Noguchi was the best traveled artist in the history of the world, which in 1960 might have been true. He also compared Noguchi's impact on global culture to that of the airplane, saying that Noguchi was a global synthesizer in the same way that the airplane had shrunk the globe. This is a really nice small example. This is an object that Noguchi discovered in China in 1930 when he was there in Qi Baishi's studio learning ink wash technique. So in China at the time, it was not uncommon for passenger pigeons, carrier pigeons, to wear these little gourds, whistling gourds. So as they flew, they would make a very distinct sound, and your pigeon would have a gourd, the sound of which you recognized. So it's like a sort of a GPS locator for your pigeon. And Noguchi turned that into a concept for a musical weather vane, which he wanted to see on the roof of every American barn, every American home. This was a device that was meant to be internally lit, and when the wind blew through it, it would make a song. So turning the idea of the sort of beacon calling you home into a multimedia experience. You said Noguchi is very philosophical. Another way to put it is that Noguchi was a very conceptual artist from the beginning. He's very well known for being associated with Constantine Brancusi. What's less well known is that he toured the Brancusi show here in New York City at the Bremer Gallery with Duchamp, who was its curator. And Noguchi, I think, is probably the first American artist in the 20th century who truly spanned the two trunks of the sculpture's family tree between the formal and the conceptual.
And of course, he also spans into design, which I suppose is what we're meant to be talking about mainly. So can you just say a little bit more about that, Dakin? Julianne also has already mentioned the beautiful and important Akari lamps. How did he get involved with making those and the other functional designs that he did?
Well, he really saw no division. There was no barrier or border for him between, again, art and design. He wanted to make things that were accessible and would have an impact on people's everyday lives. And he was determined to make sculpture more useful to society and civilization. He wanted to serve a civic purpose. And what better way to serve a civic purpose than by making things that people could actually have in their homes? So the purpose of Akari was to make something that would have the natural residence of the sun, but for domestic use, which is a beautiful idea. These coffee tables, all of the tables that he made, Although I always describe these as table, not table, because they're all meant to be somewhat awkward. They're meant to play against the typical formats of the tables that we know: coffee tables, dining tables, console tables, end tables. None of them quite fit any given category. And they do things like challenge the hierarchy of tables. Most tables communicate where the head of the table is. Noguchi's tables mostly are designed to defeat that kind of hierarchical categorization. Or here you can see, this table that's coming up for sale at Sotheby's is going to carry a price that makes people want to call it art. And again, Noguchi just wasn't interested in the categories. Here, the legs he probably made himself. The top he likely made himself, but I would bet absolutely everything I own that he got that bowl, which is described as a hand-spun metal bowl. I'm sure he bought it at one of the restaurant supply stores on Canal Street here in Manhattan that used to be very common, that actually are still here on the Bowery. You can still go get pretty much that exact same mixing bowl at maybe even the same store. So combining the quotidian with the handmade and doing it in a way that made it accessible. And that table was originally a made-to-order item, as so much mid-century furniture was. It was very speculative in nature. So companies would put things into catalogs and advertise them without it having made any, and waiting to see if they got, or maybe just making one prototype, and would wait to see if they got any orders, and then more would be made. So we believe that probably Noguchi made the first few himself before Herman Miller stepped in and regularized production. And then it turns out not very many were ordered. So that's why there are so few of these extraordinary marble top coffee tables out there.
It's so interesting to think about him compressing these different types of materials into his objects, beautifully shaped stone and wood, but also very inexpensive pre-made or ready-made bowl like that. Julianne, I know you've been kind enough to have a look at some of the objects in the sale and picked out some of your favorites, and of course Noguchi would be among those. So can you say a little bit about the table, not table situations that Noguchi made that Dakin was talking about?
Well, first of all, that piece is exquisite. It's really, really special. And the idea that you'd be able to have something like that in your house with such extraordinary materiality, someone who is so in touch with the natural world and brought the natural world into your house in this table that is also a sculpture. So that it also, if you are interested in the people who've made these objects, this puts you in kind of direct conversation with this individual. I feel that way about being a collector. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, this person may have actually, touched this, certainly conceived of it. And that's an exciting idea. And when we were talking about, the people earlier were talking about that idea of global design and how do you kind of put all these different people and countries in conversation with one another. That's one of the things that design does. It's puts you in touch with that maker and with that philosophy. And I love that. It is how wonderful to be able to interact with something that is not just a physical object that you can use, but that it is art and it lives in your house that way. It's just extraordinary.
Can I ask you a question about the prop-like quality of great design? So I was just thinking about what would be the great movie scene to build around that table, And I wonder whether spending time on film sets has sort of made you look at design in a different way.
Well, it's interesting. Because there's design for design's sake, in film, but also, know that a great designer, a great film designer is designing for that particular character, so it's what is that, as an actor, I'm always well, clothes and objects around us are signifiers. They're telling the world who we are, right? So a great set designer is thinking first and foremost about those people, those characters that live in that house and how they are signifying themselves. So it's a kind of a weird meta process. So it's not necessarily that you are, and then you as an actor come in, of course, and interact with those objects in a way that's a whole other tangent. But I do feel, but that's where you get into that idea that these objects actually have meaning and they have personality.
And maybe there is something to the idea that Noguchi was making worlds in the way that a great set designer would make a world, albeit not a fictional one. but creating a new set of possibilities, a new reality to inhabit.
Well, I think so, and I mean, like I said, I think that his objects and his sculptures and Akari, everything. One of the reasons that it's so appealing is that it has so much soul. It has so much of him in it. It's not something that you tire of. It's not something that kind of recedes in a room. It adds an element of humanity, I think, to every situation.
Well, now that is a great segue to our next topic, which is Lalanne. So François-Xavier and Claude Lalanne, because if anybody ever made things that did not recede in a room and had that touch of humanity, it was them. So we're going to now bring in Jean-Gabriel and have him join the conversation. Jean-Gabriel, you worked with Lalanne for such a long time, really, throughout their careers and your own. How would you begin to describe them? How would you begin to describe their relationship to art and design for viewers who aren't so familiar?
The relationship with art is and design is, in fact, they did not accept to be part of design, really. François was a sculptor, for animals mainly, and Claude was working with nature, natural things, objects he found in the garden mainly. So design was not their purpose. François-Xavier create the concept of art, of sculpture with a use. A sculpture with a use is kind of homage to surrealism, because they worked at Galerie Yolas during their youth with Max Ernst, beside Max Ernst, Magritte, Brauner. They were totally in good relationship with surrealism. So the surrealism create this kind of relation between the sculpture and the use. That's the humor also of François-Xavier, who was a friend with Marcel Duchamp, and he had something from the Dada period in his mind. And when he created this sculpture with a use, he did not think of design. He was thinking of creating an approach of a collector who can manipulate the sculpture and have a new kind of relationship with the sculpture. So it was totally different than the concept of design. We arrived in their life, I think, during the 90s, when the difference was created by the market, by the museums, between art and design. Personally, I start with art and design in the 70s and 75, and I start creating multiples with important artists like the Chirico, Man Ray, Sonia Delaunay, and Lalanne and Nikit Saint-Phal. So I met with Lalanne in the middle of the 70s, and we never stopped working together, even when I built my own gallery in '88.
Amazing. That's quite a list of people that you worked with as well. Many stories to tell, I'm sure. Can I ask you a kind of simple question? What led to the Lalanne's interest in animals? Specifically, it's such a striking feature of their work and so unusual for their period to take that animated approach. What was it that led to them to that iconography?
I always hear François saying, animals do not lie. I think he found the truth, and Claude in nature, they found a real important essential relationship with animals and with nature. I think it was deep in their soul and in their culture. The culture of François comes from La Fontaine, Ovid, Rousseau, and also from Poussin, Chardin, Ingres, Brancusi, Magritte, and Matisse mainly. So he was really dedicated to the animal, and he did some portraits of people, but very, very few. The animal was really his way to express his art. And you see this rhinoceros, that's a very important work. He did many different models during the late 60s, 70s, till the end of his life. This one was created in 1992. That's the last model he did, but it was cast in 8 copies because the other rhinoceros desk were unique works. This one was created in 8 copies. And you can see the extraordinary perfection of the line, because he's a really classic artist with a sense of perfection of line. And you can imagine the perfection of a mechanism also, even if it looks a little like that. You know, it's made by hand. The original work is made by hand, well by his hand. And everything was made by hand in his atelier, in his studio. So it's always very moving to see those works that were created for some commissions and for few collectors in the world, and that became so famous after 40 years of work.
I think you're so right, Jean-Gabriel, to draw attention to the draftsmanship of that work. The contour silhouette of it is just so taut, and I can see how Matisse and other artists would figure into that. Let's talk about one of the masterworks of Claude Lalanne. This comes from her Chapat series. So basically it is there's no way around it. It's basically a cabbage head with chicken legs, and obviously extremely surrealist, and yet so potent and powerful and memorable. And I wonder what you make of this extremely important work of hers.
You know, first, Claude was always having a Chapat on her table. And it was changing because she did a new Chapat, but few in her life. I mean, always unique, normally always unique, because she worked from the electrolyse bath, copper bath with electricity. And we call it galvanoplasty in French. So this bath of copper took the form and the place of a real cabbage. And she did many different sizes. And it was after she had to assemble everything, to put everything together. And she put the cabbage in the 60s on chicken legs. I think it was a kind of homage to Magritte, something like that, you know, during the 60s when she was at Yola's gallery. And it became her symbol, the symbol of her work and surrealism work. It's an homage to la nature, and at the same time, it's a real extraordinary, beautiful sculpture. And she did at the end of her life, she did the cabbage legs, the Chapat, in bronze, in different sizes. Three sizes, different sizes. This one is showed here at Trianon because we are preparing now an homage to François and Claude Lalanne in Versailles, in the Trianon Park and the Queen's Hamlet. So I think it will be very important, a place to discover her work in the best situation, inside some pavilions and outdoor.
It really is an ideal situation to encounter their work, partly because although they're very obviously influenced by surrealism, there's also an evident relationship to historical decorative art and sculpture. And so the kind of monumentality, almost a Renaissance gravitas of that also very humorous object is really striking. Let's bring Florent Jeanniard into the conversation from Sotheby's. There are some great works of Lalanne coming up in the sale. And I was wondering if you could just briefly show us a few of them. Maybe we could start with the Grande Carpe, if you don't mind.
Yes. So the artwork of François-Xavier Lalanne is inseparable from the animal worlds. So for the Grande Carpe, it's an important sculpture with this idea of an exaggerated size. It's frequent in the artist's work. But for the carp, I think that François-Xavier Lalanne finds its origin from the Asia because maybe as you know, the carp is a symbol of love and virility. So in the Chinese legend, say that the carp of the Yellow River, after swimming up the river, flew to the sky and then transformed themselves into dragons. So you have always humor and great sensitivity in the work of François-Xavier Lalanne. And probably there can be no doubt that François-Xavier Lalanne was aware about this kind of legend. So this is the important pieces by him. He loved the animal worlds. It's typically the Lalanne universe.
And the importance of mythology as well. Jean-Gabriel also mentioned Ovid and La Fontaine, for example, as influences. If there's a particular work or series of works by Lalanne that most people know above all, it is their sheep. They're so famous, so iconic, so associated with their practice. So the Mouton Lalanne. You do have examples coming up in the sale. Could you speak a little bit about that family of designs?
Yes, we have the chance to have two wonderful sheep in the New York sales. For the sheep, it's iconic. It's iconic animals for François-Xavier Lalanne since 65 to until his death. He never stopped to design different versions of the sheep. He used wool, bronze, epoxy stone with different design. But it's true that the woolen sheep remain the most desirable. So it's iconic. And first major collector like Gunter Sachs, Valentino, Rothschild family, or Yves Saint Laurent were not wrong because, of course, if humor is present, there is also a certain idea of nature, protection, and certain idea already in the 70s, because we don't need to forget that Claude and François-Xavier Lalanne live in the countryside, 1 hour from Paris, in the middle of fields, forests, and animals. So there is already a certain awareness of this is artwork of François-Xavier.
Yeah, it's an incredible sensitivity as well, you know, the sort of deadpan charm of those objects. And they, in a funny way, they've occupied that imagery so completely that if you see sheep on a rolling hillside in the country, you think of the Lalanne now, or at least I do. You know, it's like they become so identified with it. Let's look at one last example, which is, well, sharp-eyed viewers will have already seen one monkey because there's one sitting behind Jean-Gabriel in his office by the Lalanne, but you have a different monkey coming up in the sale. Could you just give us a few comments about that?
Oh, the size is not the same. This one is monkey, singe alternatif. It's very famous. It's so cute. It's the icon of the Paris sale. It's an icon of François-Xavier Lalanne. The design is so perfect. I remember when I start at Sotheby's, of course, I look the sculpture like Pompon, Bugatti, but François-Xavier Lalanne have this kind of sensibility to, because for me it's a real one, it's a real monkey. Look the head, the hand, it's so perfect, it's so cute. So it's a nice drawing, it's an unbelievable sculptures, but also like an important artist. François-Xavier Lalanne is the king of the patina. The patina of the monkey, it's incredible. It's interesting, and probably one day we work to look the artwork of François-Xavier Lalanne differently regarding only the animal worlds, but also regarding the patina, the material, and this green patina is perfect. He made some different patina. You can find some gold, brown, blue, silver. And it's also very interesting because like the real sculpture is interesting by the bronze, and it's a real nice and iconic pieces.
So there, in fact, we have another connection to Noguchi, who was also so attentive to craftsmanship and to the qualities of surface and materiality. So another thing that connects these seemingly different practices. Okay, well, we now have the privilege of welcoming Julianne back to the conversation. And Julianne, I get to ask you about your house or your domestic spaces and how you approach living with design. Can you say a little bit, first of all, this is such a hard question to ask, but can you say a little bit about your taste, about your style? What do you go for in design? What are you looking for when you buy an object?
I don't know. That's a really interesting question. I mean, I'd say that you can see like right behind me. If you look right behind me, there's a Nakashima coffee table like in my living room, and that I think that was the first major piece of furniture that I ever bought. And of course, I was attracted to it because of its materiality. And I'm talking about somebody who was inspired and brought the natural world, you know, to his work. I mean, I think Nakashima is a great example of that. So I'm somebody who's very self-educated in design. I learned by just like going to galleries and talking to people, and people being very generous and teaching me. And so I learned to just respond to what I liked. And I like a certain materiality. I like a feeling of patina. I like some personality, but I don't like it to be like, you know, overwhelmingly like I couldn't deal with Memphis. That was too much personality for me.
For a lot of
you know,
people,
right. But, you know, so I think it was a lot of it. I respond to pieces that have a wonderful shape. I like a sculptural quality. I like Perriand and Jeanneret and the Borlaug brothers and Pierre Chapeau and Pablo Tainel and Raoul Guy and Karl Abach and Nana Dietzel. And, you know, so these are people who I felt were doing such interesting work in terms of their craftsmanship and in terms of the materials that they worked with. And I feel like I learned more all the time, and I learned so much from gallerists and dealers who were showing these pieces and educating me about them.
Would you say also that the story of a piece is very important to you, the story of that designer or that specific object? Is that something you look into deeply?
Yes, usually after I have responded to someone's work, I look into their story. I think it's interesting to me that Pierre Chapeau is someone who still, you know, his operation is still happening. It's still his family that's manufacturing those pieces, and you feel it. It feels very personal. It feels like a family. It feels it has a realness to it that's appealing to me. You know, so I'm always interested in who these people were, what their philosophies were. I think it's interesting that you know, Charlotte Perriand's whole history is really, really fascinating. And yeah, you get drawn to the people as well as the objects. And I don't understand this thing. I mean, I know that you all live in this world with this delineation that people feel, but that there is between art and design. For me, I think the more interaction you can have with an object, the more value it has. So I don't understand why so many people in the world feel like if somehow it's a useful object, it therefore is less valuable. So I would love someone to explain that to me.
Oh, well, I can only say amen to that. I think that fortunately, I think more and more people are coming to that viewpoint, and the old hierarchies are falling apart, really. One more question. Can you just say a little bit about how it's changed over time for you working with design? I mean, you've talked a lot already about how you've educated yourself and learned from gallerists and so on. Do you look at it differently now than you did when you first encountered that Akari lamp? Has it really changed for you?
Oh, yes. Of course, because you slowly become educated. You know, you see more and more, and the more you see, the more you're able to kind of, the more your taste evolves. And you know, the person who first saw, you know, the young person who saw that first Hikari lamp is not the person who ever encountered Ruhlmann, you know, for example. Like, I wouldn't have come into contact with that at all. So you do, you become exposed to more, and you become interested in things. And I think also, you know, we haven't talked a lot about fashion and design either. I can remember when there was a Stickley craze in the United States. You know, I remember when there was a Biedermeier craze. I mean, does everybody remember the Biedermeier craze? And somehow, like, that's disappeared. So I'm interested in that too, the way it kind of evolves just in terms of your personal taste, and also how fashion and design changes.
Yeah, and where those trends come from and sort of what
Yeah.
lies behind them. That's the sort of thing design historians like me get super fascinated by. So it's not just when the things are being made, it's also when they come back into view and
Yes.
start to become appealing again. Yeah.
Exactly, like what
I think
happened
it's
to
also
Biedermeier? What was that?
yeah, what did happen to Biedermeier? Maybe that'll be the topic of the next conversation.
Great.
I think it might just be worth saying a word about the role that auction houses too actually play in educating. I mean, obviously we're doing it right now through this event, but I think, if I may, I think they aren't often given the credit that they're due for creating the kind of track record and archive, and also the transparency into these stories that they do. So I, for one, am very appreciative. And so it's great to have you here in the Sotheby's related event, I will say. So Julianne, we'll get back to you in a second, because I wanted to ask you about a couple of the things that are coming up in the sale. But first, I just wanted to ask Florent to talk about one of those things, which is a particularly important one. It's a table by Giacometti. Florent, can you just say a little bit about this? No, it's not Lalanne and it's not Noguchi, but it really deserves a moment. So let's have a look at it.
Yes, but it's interesting because Diego look like the same spirit of Isamu Noguchi and François-Xavier Lalanne. It's a long story for this table, and quickly we are super delighted because you have two amazing things regarding this table. First of all, the name of Diego Giacometti, this amazing sculpture, and also the provenance regarding the first owner. And this one is Henri Samuel, the greatest decorator. And it's a long story regarding Diego and Henri Samuel. They meet in the mid-60s, and Henri Samuel immediately fell under the spell of the artist's work. Look, the table, the perfect proportion, the subtle patina, and the poetic spirit for this kind of table. And the name of this one is Cariatide and Atlante, because on each angle you have the woman and the man. And for the short story, in 1976, Henri Samuel left the flat in Quai d'Orsay, and he decided to move Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré in Paris. And naturally, he commissioned some pieces to Diego Giacometti, and Diego makes this table especially for him. And it's interesting to show that Henri Samuel was the first decorator to commission directly some artist. And probably could ask to Lalanne to make something for him, but I'm not sure that he meet Claude and François-Xavier. But in this time, he asked to Philippe Iquili, Guy de Rougemont, César, and also François Arnal to make some coffee table, some console. And of course, this coffee table, and we are very delighted to show again this iconic piece. It's a true masterpiece. And the proportion is perfect. The story is unbelievable. So I love this one. It's my first choice in the Paris sale.
I always love it when somebody in an auction house will actually tell you what their favorite is. It's always so nice to hear. So, Julianne, I know that you had chosen another example from the Giacomettis. So this is a pair of table lamps that were designed by Alberto, executed by Diego Giacometti. Why did they stand out to you in particular?
Oh, they're just beautiful. I mean, my God, so perfect, so simple, so elemental. I love the like once again, I love the material. I love the fact that there's a pair. I love a pair of lamps for balance. And for me, lamps are challenging. You know, it's like you once again, they're these objects that you need, but you I don't know, there's a sense of simplicity and beauty, and you know, the fact that they are Giacometti. I don't know. I just adored them. I feel like they could be, you'd love them forever, absolutely forever.
Yeah, well said. It's, you know, like the table that Florent was just showing us, they also have this wonderful quality of being both ancient and modern at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
and I think
interesting
that's
to me
one of
that
the things that, oh no, sorry. That sense of timelessness, like I realize, like a lot of things that I respond to, I don't want to be able to place them. I don't want to say like this is a particular moment in time. I want to feel like that and in a way, when you assemble a collection from different time periods, if you have that sense of timelessness, there's a wonderful sense of continuity then that you get as well, just for people, for human beings.
I just want to point something out. It's not really a question, but those lamps are kind of like the opposite of an Akari lamp. Like they're so hard and concentrated, and an Akari is so floating and ethereal, like a soap bubble. It's really interesting that you would love them both.
But they both have a very strong sense of shape. Do you know? I mean, they're both like delineated. They both take up space in a very delineated way. And then there's also, and then within a space too, they have I mean, it's weird to say neutrality, but I feel like you could have those Giacometti lamps and a Noguchi lamp in the same space and they would be able to, you know, have a conversation.
Absolutely. And I always think a common feature of all great design is that it somehow etches itself in space in a way that makes itself feel inevitable. And those are great examples. Okay, one last object. This is a desk by Jean-Michel Franck, the great French Art Deco era designer.
Hi, Jacques.
Somehow we got our video back there for a second, but let's talk about Jean-Michel Franck. As I said, technical mishaps. So what attracted to you this stunning Art Deco example, Julianne?
Oh my God. It's so beautiful. It's so incredibly simple. I love the color. I love the top of it, the vellum top, Franck there's a famous quote, and I can't remember who said it, about somebody who visited his apartment, a famous writer who visited his apartment early on and wondered if the young man had been robbed. Do you remember who said that? But
I've never heard that. That's great.
But I loved it. I was actually trying to find out where I read that. But he was so revolutionary. You know, he kind of came on the scene at a time where things had been very ornamental, and suddenly he was doing this stuff where everything was very, very spare and elemental and stripped away and simple, and you just saw these kind of shapes everywhere. And still, I'll go back and look at, you know, photographs of those interiors and just marvel at his eye and his sense of proportion. And I think this desk is absolutely perfect. It's so beautiful. And I hope it finds a really wonderful home because it deserves it.
Yeah, I always think, you know, that phrase, the devil is in the details, the same is true of the angels. You know, the angels are in the details, and that desk is just the perfect example of that. Okay, well, I'm happy to say we're right on time to take some questions from the audience for a few minutes. So thanks everyone for those wonderful contributions and insights. The first question we have is, thanks for this great event. Just wondering what made you bring Noguchi and the Lalannes into the same conversation? That's a fair question. As we said, it's a little bit unexpected. Florent, could you say a little bit about that first? Why did you and the team at Sotheby's think that this would be an interesting pairing? And I'd love to get Dakin back in the conversation and ask for Dakin's thoughts about the relationship between Noguchi and the Lalannes in a little bit more depth.
For Sotheby's, it's an initiative. We want to make something new. Paris and New York is the two best place for the design market. So it was interesting to think about difference. And we are super delighted to sell the same week, the 25 May for New York, the 26th for Paris. So it just this kind of idea suddenly when I was on the phone with New York and especially with Jody Pollack. And she said, oh, I'm super happy. We win this incredible table by Isamu Noguchi. And me too, in the same time, I received the confirmation for the client to say, you have the GIACOMETTI table. And just after, we win another important lot by François-Xavier Lalanne. So we have always discussion with New York and London too and Hong Kong. But for this one, we say with Jody, we need to make something together. We need to, I think also we need in a new world. So the idea just to say, okay, the world is big, but it's also very small. And Paris, New York, Noguchi, Lalanne, it's this kind of idea, and we decide to make something together.
I love that. What a great description. Thank you. Dakin, can you say a little bit from the perspective of being Mr. Noguchi? How does it feel to have him paired with the Lalannes today?
Well, it is a surprising combination, but I think it's really very inspired. And I think Julianne really said it best, and what unites them is also seen in her taste, which is it's really about objects that have a live edge, you know, that bring nature in a real way into our everyday lives. Those sheep are so extraordinary because they represent the mystery, the nobility, the kind of also the silliness of nature that we see in nature. They're also an object lesson for humankind. They're both of what to do and what not to do, how not to be. You know, but they were interested, the Lalanne, in recalibrating our relationship with the natural world. And that's really what all of Noguchi's work is about. He was very concerned that we had fallen out of scale, as he put it, with nature, that we had lost our sense of scale with the natural world. And he was trying to repair that through the things that he made. And I think all things that have a live edge to them, the Nakashima table in Julianne's room is very much the same, that it feels like you could be outdoors, you could be wandering through the forest, you know, looking for that pool at the heart of the forest to take a dip in. They have that kind of renewal to them that we get when we reconnect with the natural world.
It's so amazing to hear that phrase, and it's such a great example of Noguchi's prescience, this idea of being out of scale with nature, and the fact that he would have said that so long ago, and think about what we're all talking about now. It's absolutely amazing to sort of wrap your mind around that. Thank you. Okay, next question. I'm going to suggest, Jean-Gabriel, that you tackle this one. So this is a question about the great countries that stand out for you as centers of design. I'm going to guess you're going to say France as one of them, but I wonder what other countries stand out to you as being wonderful homes and contexts for the production of great design.
Great design? Which countries? Japan, for sure. I think that Japan is the most inspiring place for design. And antique China also, I think that's a source of inspiration for all designers and for artists also. So that's a question you asked for?
Well, I'd love to hear you say a little more maybe about Japan, because I think you rightly stressed it as a place where design has a very special place in the culture and an incredibly powerful history. Could you just say a little bit more about that? And also, do you see connections between Japanese design and French design?
I think that Dakin could speak a lot more about Japan and style. But when you see Tadao Ando, when you see the great artists and the great architects from Japan, you imagine the culture behind and the spirit and the inspiration of those works. So I remember that François Lalanne worked for Hakone Art Museum, Open Art Museum. He did the mausoleum for the owner of this park. And he did the white fountain, the head. For once, it was a human head crying, and with taupière on the top. And this head is, for me, is the expression of a relation between a French artist with Japan, because the purity of the line, the emotion coming from this purity and this simplicity is extremely moving. And I think it built a very interesting relationship between the past and the future, and between François Lalanne at this period 20 years ago, 25 years ago even, and the Japan tradition. So I think that's a very interesting example of a relation between François Lalanne and Japan.
Okay, thank you so much, Jean-Gabriel. And that also strikes me as a great subject for a future conversation. Now we've done New York and Paris, let's do Paris and Kyoto next. One last question, which I'm going to pose to you, Julianne. This is a funny question, maybe a little difficult, but someone wants to know. If you could have your home entirely redone by any designer, living or dead, who would it be?
Oh my God.
I know.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I don't know that I would ever choose one designer. I mean, I have to say, it's like you don't. I mean, I don't know if the question is like a particular interior designer, or if they're talking about like a particular designer of objects or furniture. But I think that for me, the most interesting thing is, like, as I said before, and I don't mean to sound like precious about it, but the conversation that these objects have, with each other, and that you kind of where you juxtapose them, like we're talking about the Giacometti and the Noguchi. How amazing to have these kinds of objects in the same room. How wonderful to have something that has supposedly a lot of value and a lot of provenance with something that you just found on the street or something. I like that. I mean, I like the idea that a house is layered, that it's, sometimes I look at some of the stuff that I've acquired and I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking when I got that? That's terrible. But I kind of appreciate the fact that, like I said, that the 27-year-old me acquired that piece and has hung on to it, and that the older me has something else. So I don't think I would ever want it to be all one thing. But that's not to say that I don't tire of what I have sometimes and think like, okay, I want to change everything.
Yeah, so it's fascinating though, Julianne, because it's almost like you're having a conversation with yourself by living in a home that you've built up over many years. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful way to put it. I think so. I mean, you're seeing, you're seeing who you were at the time when you acquired something. You're remembering where you were when you found it. I actually have a set of dining chairs that I bought in Paris in 1995 during the transportation strike, and I bought them at a store, in one of those galleries near the Louvre, and they're not signed. And I remember the woman told me, she goes, that they're possibly franc. I think they're probably not. But they're beautiful and they're simple. And it was so hard for me to get them all the way back to LA, because I lived in LA at the time, that they have incredible meaning to me. So they may not mean something to somebody else, but they work with everything else I have. And they remind me of the person who brought them home from Paris during a transportation strike.
What's more important than that sense of, inhabiting your own self, I suppose, and that's what design allows you to do. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Okay, what a great ending. Thank you so much, everyone. Speaking of good conversations, happening in this case over long distances, it's been such a pleasure. My huge thanks to Julianne Moore, Dakin Hart, Jean-Gabriel Mitterrand, and Florent Jeanniard for all your contributions, and to Intelligence Squared for your help. Thanks, guys. Thanks, team, in putting this all together. The sales, the important design sales at Sotheby's, are taking place in New York on the 25th of May and in Paris on the 26th. For more information, please visit sotheby's.com/importantdesign or the Sotheby's app, and I know you will. Thanks for tuning in so much today. It's been such a pleasure to have you with us and to have this great conversation. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.